Well, good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces here. Thank you for participating in this evening's forum. My name is Mary Beth Walsh. I'm an Assemblywoman for the 112th Assembly District, which is right here in Clifton Park, and a number of other towns in this area, going north, basically from here. So. I am very honored, and I was asked to host one of these forums. They're being held around the state, and everyone here has been commenting on how beautiful this library is. I just want to, before we get started, I just wanted to thank the Clifton Park Half Moon Library for allowing us to host and hold this forum here tonight. They've been wonderful to work with. I'd like to thank all of the staff, including my own staff, that's been helpful in trying to get this set up. And I want to thank all of you for responding and saying that you'll give up some of your evening to come here and share your insights on this really important topic. So I'm joined tonight by some of my colleagues, but really my friends in government and in the State Assembly. And I think what we'd like to do is just maybe everybody could introduce themselves and maybe say a few words before we get started hearing from all of you. So thanks again for being here.
You want me to go? Sure. Good evening, and we're lucky to be here in such a wonderful library. I want to thank Mary Beth for hosting this. We have done this throughout the state. The idea is very simple. We're looking to create a clearinghouse of information with good ideas and best practices. So what we've done is gone through the state, had forums like this, asked folks like you to tell us what you thought were the best ideas to keep the schools safe and secure. It's really that basic. We will be writing a report when this is all done. I am not from around here. I am from the 148th District, which is in Western New York. So I am a visitor, and I have enjoyed my ride. But thank you very much for coming.
Well, good evening. I'm Assemblyman Matt Simpson. I represent the 114th Assembly District, which is Warren, Washington, Essex, and the northern part of Saratoga County. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here to discuss this topic. And I'm very much interested in hearing from all of you on ideas and thoughts about how we can come together and work forward on this issue next year. Thank you.
It's good to be here, and thank you so much, Mary Beth, for hosting us. What a beautiful library. Doug Smith, I'm representing Long Island. Actually, we have representatives from the Capital Region, Long Island, New York City, or as we call it on the island, the city, and the North Country, as well as Western New York. So we're happy to join here. We've been traveling the state to get input from parents, law enforcement, and people who work in the schools. So we're hoping to keep our kids safe. So thank you for hosting.
Hi, my name is Mike Riley. I am the Assemblyman from the 62nd Assembly District down in Staten Island, New York, in part of New York City. I am grateful to be a part of this task force. I co-chair it with Doug Smith and Joe Giglio. I thank Mary Beth for hosting us. And like they said before me, I'm here to listen and gather the most information we can have for best practices, and give our school districts in both urban and suburban the resources they need and the best practices that they can look at. So thank you for having us.
All right, so you can see that from the accents and from the locations where everybody is, it's a pretty nice slice of the whole state that's going to be listening to you tonight. And like I said, I'm looking out, and I definitely recognize a lot of people who are here tonight, and I know we're going to have a good and thoughtful conversation, which is really what it's all about. I know that not everyone here is planning on actually speaking, and and that's fine. If you want to be here and listen, that's okay too. I'm going to be taking notes. I know we'll all be taking notes. If that's as much as you'd like to do, that's fine. If you'd like to actually stand and speak, I think the plan would be to have you come up either solo or in groups if you're here with other people, and share the mic and talk to us. So, Joe, did we want to go kind of in the order of the expected attendees, or how do we want to organize that?
We can do either. We could do one from law enforcement, one from the school districts, and additional. It just depends how you want to do it.
Okay.
and how long these folks have to stay with us. So it's up to us.
Okay. Well, I have a list of the expected attendees, and I guess what we'll do is, why don't we do that? We'll mix it up. We'll start maybe with law enforcement, and then and then choose a person from school district personnel. And then we have additional attendees who are here as well, and we'll just kind of mix it up. So we kind of do the discussion like that. So why don't we start, is Michelle Areola here from the Glenville Police Department? Hey, Michelle, how you doing?
I'm good. I was just planning on observing.
That is fine. That is totally fine. It's good to see you. So why don't we ask, is Dan Morley here? Where's Dan? Is he here this evening? Hello there. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Were you planning on speaking with us, or are you here to listen tonight?
I submitted some written testimony, but I'd be happy to summarize it if you'd like.
That would be great, if you don't mind. Why don't you come on over and take a seat, if you don't mind? And while he's coming up, I'll just tell you, a captain with the Saratoga County Sheriff's Department, our partners up here that specifically provide protection to Clifton Park, but the whole county. So thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. Gentlemen, appreciate you taking the time to come up and listen to our concerns and listen to some of the observations that we have. As I said, I submitted some written testimony earlier this afternoon. I'll summarize it briefly for you here. We have an SRO program, School Resource Officer program, in almost every school in the county. One of our partners is here tonight, Shenandoah. They're a tremendous partner with us. Our SRO program began in 2018, and right now I'm the person that oversees it. Nary a day goes by where we don't get a threat of some kind in one of our schools. Whether it's over the internet, social media, in person, sometimes you'll find it scrawled on the bathroom wall. Many of these threats are very time sensitive, as you probably can appreciate. They involve a tremendous amount of manpower, oftentimes many subpoenas to get the information that we need. It's a situation where we can't afford to be wrong. That's what it comes down to. Every single threat that we get, as innocuous as it might seem, you have to run it down. You have to be sure nothing else is acceptable. We don't often have the time to do it when we have emergency calls pending, which is one of the reasons the SRO program is so valuable to us. The training that we get for SROs, we have an SRO training program now where you can get state certification through the Division of Criminal Justice Services. That's been something that's extremely important. It's something that's uniform statewide. It's something that we can look to for training. It's something that we can look to as a resource. I can't recommend it enough. There's another program that we've been fortunate enough to be involved in recently as a result of a grant. It's called the Crisis Intervention Training. It's a week-long program. It's rather intensive. It basically operates under the principle that in a severe mental health call or a crisis situation, law enforcement should be the last people that respond to it. Let me clarify when it's appropriate, and it's not always appropriate. But there are those situations where someone is in crisis and the last person that they're going to want to see is law enforcement. It teaches you how to deal with those situations so that when you are the person that responds to it, you have the tools to effectively deal with it and not make a crisis situation worse. Some of the tools that we need: mental health. Mental health, mental health, mental health. It is sorely, sorely lacking. I've seen a reluctance on the part of hospitals to take people and keep them, basically. We have people on occasion that appear to be mentally ill and they're threatening harm to themselves. We bring them to the hospital and half an hour later they're released and on the streets again. It's extraordinarily difficult to get somebody to stay. We have great mental health partners in the community. One of them is here tonight, and honestly, without him, many of our programs wouldn't exist, and that's Dr. Prezioso. He's been a phenomenal ally. We need more training. We need to learn how to deal with people in those situations. And as I said, the crisis intervention training is one method, but there's also others. We need to have the resources when these people ask for help, so that when we do bring them to the hospital or we do get crisis services involved, they're not kicked loose an hour later and basically starting from scratch all over again. I don't pretend to know the reasons why people do what they do. If I did, I'd probably be at the racetrack right now making a lot more money. But regardless of the reason, they know what it is. They have a reason. And we have to be able to meet them where they are. We have to be able to provide them the services that they need when they ask for it, not a couple weeks later. The last thing I'll say is with respect to criminal charges. It's difficult for me to imagine. I appreciate the fact that there's a new law in place that allows us to act a little bit more appropriately than we did in the past, the making a threat of mass harm charge. However, the charge is a Class B misdemeanor. As you know, it's the lowest level of a criminal offense in New York State. It's not even bail eligible. It's hard for me to believe that our legislature can't come up with something a little bit more serious than a Class B misdemeanor for somebody who's threatening to shoot up a school. In contrast, stealing a pack of gum is a Class A misdemeanor. We're sending out a very, very, very conflicting message. And if you think the kids in these schools don't know that, you're crazy. They do. That's a summary of the testimony that I've provided you. I appreciate the opportunity to give it to you in person. Hopefully I was able to do it in a concise manner and not offend too many people, but I appreciate the opportunity.
No, I didn't offend anyone. I think I really appreciate that you did. I'm wondering if maybe we would want to open it up to any questions
Yeah, we
that we have
would
here.
like to ask some questions. If I can start, what do you do about threat assessment? You say you get a lot of threats, but when they come in, what's the first thing that you guys do?
First thing we
How
do
you
is,
share 'em?
when we get a threat for the school specifically, first thing we would do is notify the school resource officer.
Okay.
Obviously, most of the time we're getting the threat or the call from the school resource officer because of the relationships that they have with the school. The school will reach out directly to them, whether it's on hours or off hours, and they take the calls. So if it's something that needs to get assigned to the road patrol immediately, then they'll run with it. If we need to get an investigator involved with it, they'll run with it. It depends on the circumstances. There's no real cookie-cut answer for it, unfortunately.
How many SROs, if you could speak to this, because this is something we've seen across the state where there's just a lack, the departments don't have as enough. We have SROs that are covering multiple school districts, sometimes many miles apart.
How many do we have?
You don't have to necessarily go on record specifically, but like how many schools would one cover? How far, how many districts would one cover?
Generally speaking, for Shenandoah, for example, we have 3 school resource officers that cover the high school, the middle school, and there's 2 that are assigned to the middle school, correct? For the other schools, usually one person will cover the high school, another one will cover the middle school and the elementary school, depending on the size. That varies too.
Okay, so it sounds like you're actually able to more effectively work with the school districts. Other parts of the state have had a real challenge with that, so you do have fairly decent coverage. Do they work with in-house security with the school districts as well?
They do. Many school districts have their own security and they work very closely with them.
Okay.
We've had nothing but good success working with the schools. Our relationships with the schools have been phenomenal. So I'm not sure to which part of the state you're having the difficulties, but it's
Yeah, on
been
Long
great.
Island, for example, we have in Nassau and Suffolk County, we have sheriff's office. We also have police departments, and in many cases, they're dealing with 2 or 3 school districts that are fairly large. They might only have 1 officer that's able to handle that. So it sounds like you guys have figured something out where you're able to accommodate that.
I'd say so, yeah.
Captain Morley, I have a question. You mentioned the crisis intervention training.
Yep.
And I was really intrigued by it. Where is that grant from?
You're going to make me say the name of the organization. Every time I have to do it, I look it up.
I'm sorry.
It's the Rochester Institute for Police and Behavior. Oh, gosh, I'm going to butcher it. It's an organization out of Rochester. The gentleman's name is Dr. Don Kamin, Kamin. And honestly, it's some of the best training I've been to in 25 years.
Thank you. That's going to be very helpful. I have a second question.
Sure.
That with the next phase of raise the age law coming up in January, there's going to be there was this the amended version of it in the legislature where it's going into effect in January, where age 7 to 12 will not be able to go through the criminal the criminal facet of family court, right? Or I should say, the family section of criminal court. Is the Saratoga County Sheriff's Department working with the school district to maybe address any concerns that may arise after January, when we may not be able to address those issues?
I would say that the conversation's constantly ongoing with specifics to what you just asked about. Yeah, that's a conversation, that's a topic of concern to us, obviously. So we're speaking about it constantly.
And I just want to note that your example and clarification with the Class B misdemeanor, with the comparing it to petty larceny is really dramatic and right on point, I should say.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that. Sure. Because that's something that we definitely can understand. So thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
I had a question. I believe you mentioned that more training. Is it more training programs need to be developed or more resources to be able to provide the training?
Time and money are a huge thing
Time
for
and
us. Right now, the staffing issue is one that's, honestly, I haven't seen this much overtime in my entire career. It's something that, not so much that the programs don't exist, but we don't have time to do it because of the call volume and because of the other things that are going on around us. The programs exist. Like I said, the crisis intervention training is fantastic. There's a couple offshoots of it. There's some mental health courses, mental health first aid, for example. They do exist. It's a matter of being able to fund it, and it's a matter of being able to find the time to get to it.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you bringing up the mental health aspect because I'm hearing from hospitals, it's resources. It's having the people qualified and there and all of that, and they need support also to develop those programs.
And it's frustrating also because you can see somebody who's quite clearly in crisis and you bring them to get the help that they need. And to see them walking the street an hour later is just beyond comprehension sometimes. But they have their own rules, and we've had conversations with the hospitals that are ongoing, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't know what criteria they need to follow at all the time. It's good to keep having the conversations, but clearly we have a lack of resources.
Thank you, Kathy.
Sure.
I just wanted to ask, following up on the mental health piece, what is your take on the availability of mental health services within the schools?
There's been a lot of movement with mobile crisis services. Some of the schools are contracted with an agency called Northern Rivers, mobile crisis. They've been very good to work with. Some of the other things that we'll do in a crisis situation, obviously the school can handle that internally with a guidance counselor. But if it rises to the level where we need a 941 is an involuntary admission by police officers, or 945, which is an involuntary admission with a community health services designee's order, we'll do that. We do it, unfortunately, pretty frequently, where we'll bring someone from a school to the hospital for an evaluation.
And I have one question that really goes beyond what you spoke about, but was something that was on my mind. We often hear about the need to harden the schools from outside people coming in from the outside that would want to do harm. Is that something that the Saratoga County Sheriff's Department also works with schools on?
Yes. To summarize, yes. I'm sure you remember the call that we had at the Ballston Spa High School.
Yes, I do.
It was a shotgun start for a golf tournament at the school, next to the school, I'm sorry. I'm not sure whose idea it was to set a shotgun off or fireworks off at, not delivery time, but the arrival time. As you can imagine, it caused quite a panic and quite the response. The good thing that came out of that, in my opinion, was that we got the opportunity to see our mechanisms in action, and quite frankly, it was somewhat gratifying to see how smoothly it worked and how quickly everything fell into place.
How many of the schools in Saratoga County have utilized outside security? Are you aware?
Off the top of my head, Saratoga Springs does, Mechanical does. I would have to get back to you with an exact number. I'm not sure.
But in those instances where outside security is utilized, there still is an SRO program that's running within the school as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So it can be, and what's your experience about the ability of those two to work together?
I haven't heard any difficulties.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you so much. I really
My pleasure.
appreciate your
Sure.
time.
Yep.
And thank you for the written testimony as
No
well.
problem.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think at this point, now why don't we jump down to our first listed school district representative, and that would be Dr. Oliver Robinson, who's the superintendent of Shenandoah Central School District. Dr. Robinson, it's so great to have you here this evening.
Sure.
Thank you for your time.
And I'm joined by Rebecca Carmen. And we'll
Yes, it's nice to
start off
see you,
with the
Rebecca.
comments.
Nice to see you.
Come on over. So just so, because you guys aren't from here, Matt, you know, but Shenandoah School District is the school district that covers where we are right now.
Oh, okay.
It would be, I don't know if it would be, how it would compare to a school district in Nassau, Suffolk, but around here, it's large. We would consider it a large school district here, and you could maybe speak about that.
The central school
Sure.
district,
Yes.
basically. That's what, yeah, we have some of those.
Yes.
I mean, yep.
Sure. First of all, my colleague Rebecca Carmen is with me. She works out of my office that oversees all our district-related protocols related to safety, health, welfare, and mental health. So she'll offer some comments as well. Welcome to the Shen District, as we so affectionately call it. We're a school district of almost 10,000 students. This is my 18th year as superintendent of schools here. So in my 22nd year, the reason why I'm saying that because I've seen a lot of these conversations over the years. Some things have changed, some things have stayed the same. So hopefully some of the comments that I will share with you, which we also gave a written copy, will provide you some enlightenment in terms of how we as a school district are contending with the issues of school safety on a daily basis. First comment, school superintendents in New York State and across the country take it as a personal obligation to all families to engage in proven practices, and the key word there is proven practices, to keep every child safe while they're at school, when they're away from home. Our schools remain, while there has been, I think, upwards of 250 school-related shootings right now across the country, our schools still remain among the safest places for children and young people. Each year and throughout the year, we work with partners in law enforcement and first responders, fire and EMS, to re-examine our security protocols, practices, and training, to identify and address what we call pinch points in our systems and our practices, and engage in reasonable improvements. So it's a constant review process. Certainly, as lawmakers, it's understandable that you're asking what else can you do to help avert yet another tragic loss of life and the erosion of the sanctity of our communities, and to demonstrate your resolve in doing so. So we hope that for this purposes, some of the comments we will offer will lend to some thoughtful deliberations and hopefully decisions, and hopefully additions of additional resources so we can in fact more effectively do the things that we're charged to do and expected to do by our communities. School safety isn't about any one thing. It's not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Here at Shenandoah, we have taken a multi-tiered approach to our planning efforts and have employed various tactics and procedures. The district's safety and comprehensive plan focuses on 3 components. First component is preparation and prevention. In that, we focus a lot on incident command protocols to ensure that everyone is on the same page, same language. We look at our district and school level safety team, people constantly trained, again, within the incident command protocol. Our engagement with law enforcement. Not only we have the benefit of having New York State Police as well as Saratoga County Sheriff, essentially, in our backyards. Our engagement with first responders, again, within the incident command protocols. I emphasize that because that's something that has to be much more uniformed across the state. So when people show up to the scene, we're all speaking the same language. Training. Training is a big component of our preparation and prevention. From tabletop training to predetermined drills, and some of the drills range from active shooters to evacuation drills to lockdown drills to shelter-in-place drills. Tons and tons and tons of school-based safety meetings to ensure that there's a high degree of comfort by employees within the school buildings as well as our students. Early warning and threat assessment. Tremendous pride goes into ensuring that we take the time to understand what's going on in the life of a young person before we draw conclusions or, quite frankly, what you demonstrate our biases towards a young person, to really try to authentically and sincerely understand what's going on with the young person. Crisis management. How do we contend with those issues after the fact? It's great that we can identify, but what do we do to, again, support a young person and reintroduce them back into the school environment after a situation? Safety audits and risk assessment. Each year we have proactive steps, again engage with our first responders, be it EMS, fire, law enforcement, and we do safety audits for all our buildings, walking through the buildings and asking them to poke holes, see where deficiencies are, see where gaps are, so we can try to address those gaps from year to year. We engage with surveillance systems, so we have video surveillance. We monitor chats, we monitor social media, so those type things to get information or intel. We have 24/7 campus security in our schools, as well as we have monitors within the school buildings. And certainly one of the things that's in recent days has been effective is our hotline. We have a district hotline where somebody could call 24/7, and someone's always going to answer, or it's going to go directly to a beeper, and a beeper translates to someone who will be doing the follow-up regardless of the time of the day. Automated facilities lockdown. Tremendous amount of resources expended to ensure that we can compartmentalize our schools in the midst of a crisis by the push of a button. Hardening the physical the physical access to doors. So we have here badges, and I just put mine away ironically. So scan badges to every door within the school is always locked, so you scan it to go into different buildings. Same thing with windows, hardening of windows. So hardening of facilities is a big part of it. The things that people see, but they don't realize it's designed to do certain things. Controlled access, as I mentioned, badge and keypads. We've moved away from keys. References and resources available. Grab-and-go bags in the case of emergency. The bags that literally we call a grab-and-go with all the resources in there, and what we call a red book, which is our emergency protocols written down in every classroom. So if we have a substitute teacher, he or she goes into a classroom, the red book is there to delineate what he or she should do in case of an emergency situation. The second component is response and recovery. Recognizing that, yes, while we do preparation and we do planning, we also have to be prepared to deal with response and recovery. So again, the incident command protocol is absolutely critical, because in most cases, what we're trying to do is mitigate or minimize the impact of a crisis. And how we communicate, who's communicating, who's in charge, who's going to make a decision is critical. Seconds make the difference between life and death in some of those situations. So again, our engagement with law enforcement is critical to that as well. And our training come into play. So we do very, very active simulated training, real training where we have parents as actors, we have students as actors to really try to simulate a situation as much as we possibly can. And then the third component of that is recovery. What happens after an emergency? So what's the post-incident piece of it? Reunification becomes a big part of it. So our partnering with other organizations such as the library, a reunification point where parents meet so they're not contributing to the crisis by showing up at the crisis. Counseling for students after a crisis situation. So having the capacity to effectively do that becomes a big part of it. In some cases, we're sending our counselors to other school districts, or other school districts sending their counselors to us. So how do we network to ensure that we have the appropriate capacity to deal with the recovery aspects of it? And then crisis management teams is a big part of that. How do we debrief and learn from every experience to try to do it better the next time around, if there's unfortunately a next time around? So new laws and policies must absolutely give local education leaders and first responder partners the authority and the capacity to adapt and apply laws and resources with the sensitivity to the schools, the families, and communities they serve. The tendency is sometimes laws are too restrictive, and quite frankly, they become useless. So we have to have laws that's adapted, so we recognize that different communities have different needs, different sensitivities. Funding streams dedicated to school safety should be sustainable and predictable. Sustainable and predictable. And again, with some flexibility for utilization. Funding should be targeted also, so let me back to the funding piece. We mentioned school resource officers. We pay as a school district for our school resource officers. So for schools that cannot pay for school resource officers, they don't have school resource officers. That should not be the case if we're serious about safety. So funding either to cover or subsidize some of those costs becomes a critical component. Funding targeted towards children's mental health services. That's a challenge for us, specifically for mental health services for students. So both within schools and within the communities beyond, particularly the communities after the fact. How do we support families and students outside of school? Become a big part of it. Here at Shenandoah, we have outside mental health providers within the school. Saratoga Center for the Family provide counselors within the school to try to make it easier for families to support their needs as we move forward. Reviewing and adjusting the limits on some of the earnings for some of our employees. We have a lot of retired law enforcement officers that cannot work for schools because it goes against their pension.
Right.
And so we miss an opportunity for a whole population of already trained and also willing and eager to give back to their communities, but cannot do it because of pension restriction. Something for consideration. Streamline and consistent mechanism for the sharing of information across law enforcement agencies. We see this all the time. I'll give you a perfect example. Something happens in another municipality, just pick a place. Pick the city of Albany, down the street. Something happened in Albany with one of our students over the weekend. If we don't read about it in the newspaper or watch the news, that child could be back in our school the next day, and we would have no idea that the child was engaged in something that was, quite frank with you, grave or violent, or in some cases, gun-related. So how do we ensure that information can be relayed effectively between and across law enforcement agencies and then to schools so we can be better equipped to deal with that situation the day after, so to speak? So that's one a big piece that's a conversation that recognize that there are privacy laws that's out there, there are jurisdiction laws and restrictions that's out there. However, at the end of the day, all that becomes irrelevant when we talk about the life of a young person. So how do we cut through all the red tape and kind of speak to the heart of the matter? Because oftentimes we hear after the fact that someone knew something about that person or had information, but the information was not shared. So how do we try to create mechanism so that happens on a regular basis? So be it the employment of school resource officers, facility enhancements, or the hardening, quote unquote, of our school building, a primary objective is to preserve the health, safety, and welfare of students and employees alike. As a school district, we strive to protect our children from terror, taking due care that we are not terrifying them in doing so.
Yeah.
We're not creating prisons with our schools. And that's a critical point when we think about that piece of it. We certainly want to protect them from terror, but we don't want to terrorize them in trying to do so. We take tremendous pride in preserving our schools as sanctuaries for learning. In doing so, we intentionally engage in building strong relationships, connections with students and families. As an example, we're in the process right now of planning a series of community forums that addresses and speak to mental health, speak to welfare concerns. So that goes beyond the mental health, the other factors that impact families, other traumas that children bring to school every day, and then safety. So a series of forums with our respective partners within the Saratoga County community. And we also take tremendous pride that every child wants and needs to know that someone knows their name. Building those very sincere and authentic relationship with our students is probably one of the biggest asset that we could bring to the table. So how do we do that and ensure that people aren't otherwise bombarded with everything else and don't engage in that very simple act? So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Doug? You have a lot of questions.
You're speaking my language. So I was a former high school math teacher. The district that you represent and are the superintendent is very representative of a lot of the ones on Long Island. I represent Sachem and Middle Country, which are similar size number of students. Yeah. So a few things that you were mentioning, and maybe if I can just go through really quickly. So social media, how can we help you? Because this is really, and it goes for law enforcement as well. You really don't have the ability to either monitor or even enforce if there's bullying going on or something. And of course, the parents, the first people they call are you, your office probably specifically, and 911. And those are two entities that have a tough time dealing with that. Is there any way we can help?
So you're right. I mean, because of privacy issue, obviously we can't have Big Brother peeking in on people's social media chatter. So a couple ways for our internal system, the school district network. We monitor certain terminologies, certain words. So kids on their email, again, I try not to go into certain details because I don't want to tell you what we do, because everybody knows what we do and then they'll undo it. So there's some degree of monitoring that can take place within our internal structure. The piece, though, the second part of your question is actually the piece that's the greatest challenge. We encourage people, see something, say something. And oftentimes you hear kids on social media chatter, and they'll tell their parents call us, and then sometimes they take a picture of it, they send a picture to us, and quite frankly, we run it down. So while the law says that certain actions outside of school cannot be impacted in school, our perspective is it has a potential to disrupt the educational environment, and consequently, we take that as our ability to engage in conversation with a young person to figure out what's going on. So that's that first step. that first step in engaging with that young person, understand how serious was this, and if it's a threat that was very blatant, then we engage law enforcement, because at that point, it doesn't matter where the threat is coming from or where or when the threat is made.
Okay, so that's actually helpful. So you're able to interpret the existing laws to be able to be helpful, basically.
Yeah, and while we do that, sadly, unfortunately, some school districts don't necessarily take that leeway, if you will,
Right.
Of interpreting law. But we have to make the assumption that everything is a potential disruption to the educational environment, and that's our obligation to preserve the sanctity of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. So security guards, as we're talking about this, because a few weeks ago we were in New York City. New York City actually has a very interesting program of they work directly with the NYPD. Now, you had mentioned the school district employing school resource officers. That interests me because under the law, as we're talking about the salary cap, it actually specifically says school resource officers that are retired police officers employed by a school district are not subject to that cap on earnings. But school districts in other parts of the state are telling us that they don't see any situation where a school district could hire an SRO. How does that work?
So two components. So we actually contract technically with the county.
Oh, okay.
So that's the relationship. So we don't quote unquote employ them. They're employees. They're Saratoga County Sheriffs, and so we contract and then we pay the bill.
That's great.
So essentially that. On the other side of it, we also have what we call campus security. They don't carry weapons.
Right.
And that becomes where we try to, quite frankly, hire people with some experience.
Yep.
And some cases are people who are former law enforcement. And even our monitors, particular monitors at high school. So campus security people who drive around campus pretty much all the time. And then we have internal monitors who are also often a lot of our former law enforcement people who serve as monitors. People want to call them hall monitors, whatever. So that creates, again, another opportunity to bring in someone with a skill set that we typically don't have within a school environment. And in many cases, some of those folks are running up against the pension piece because what the law says is not how we're using them as a school. Right. So what needs to be revisited is, in fact, that particular part of the language that says that if you're former law enforcement, the pension restriction should be waived or can be waived to some degree so we can have people full-time and, quite frankly, attract
Right,
more
and you would
individuals.
definitely agree that it's helpful to have the same security officers in the building year-round because they build a relationship with the students, they know what they're looking for, so if you have to let somebody go in October or April, that really hurts your ability to keep the kids safe. Next up, line item reimbursements for the school aid runs. Do you think this is something that I've been talking about for years and a lot of our colleagues have been talking about? If there is a reimbursable item for school security and also maybe even mental health, is that something that would be helpful?
Yeah, certainly from an expense-driven aid perspective,
Yep.
Absolutely. Because right now, there's always a huge issue for schools, right? So you're compromising, do I teach Johnny and Sally how to read, or do I keep Johnny and Sally safer? And I hate to put it that bluntly, but oftentimes with schools in tight budget, that's what it comes down to, or we socialize a greater cost to taxpayers. So those are the alternatives that we have. And so if this can in fact be an expense-driven aid, but it has to be predictable and consistent, right? So we can't say one year we may have it, but the next year we may not have it. And that's often the problem with grant funding, because it becomes seed money, and oftentimes we push it away because once we get somebody on board and the funding goes away, then we are holding the proverbial bag on this because no one wants to cut something that people have grown accustomed to.
Absolutely. And then the last thing, because I'm asking a lot of questions, I apologize, but your
No
answers are
problem.
fantastic. When we're talking about, because this is not the first time we've heard, like you mentioned, an example if something happens with a student nearby, but you may not know about it, and obviously they're showing up to school. FERPA and HIPAA, I think you were kind of alluding to those issues. While on the federal level, is that something, and it doesn't have to be addressed tonight, but are those some things that you could maybe give us some recommendations where we could look at our federal partners for maybe some?
Well, we're actually a collection of through our Capital Region BOCES and our law enforcement partners. I think 2 weeks ago we had a meeting where we brought a lot of law enforcement, particularly SROs, to have this conversation. So it's a combination of how do we share best practices across school districts, policies and protocols, to ensure that, again, that everyone is enjoying the wealth of knowledge. The second part of it is build those relationships so those individuals know each other. So they can call and say, hey, listen, this situation happened and it's one of your kids, check it out, type thing. And so I say that because while that sounds effective, it's still too personality driven. And again, this what we're talking about here, folks, isn't something that should be personality driven. This should be concrete protocols to say that if certain type of incident occurs with a young person, we know that, and we know the residency of that young person. There should be some information relayed to say someone needs to figure out where this. And I'm giving a perfect example. It happened. I know it was out of district. I'm reading a newspaper on a Saturday, and I read about a young person in another city, and it said a Clifton Park male, and I love when they say male because 18 years old under the law, and I'm thinking that kid is a kid in our school, and I'm texting people, and within hours we found out yes, and ironically that Monday that kid would have been in summer school, and this kid was a huge weapon issue in another municipality, huge weapon issue. And so now we have to figure out. We wouldn't have known that. And so I give you that perfect example of that should not be the case, because if this kid shows up on Monday and because of some retaliation from what happened over the weekend, now something happened on our campus and somebody's going to come to me on Tuesday and tell me that we knew about it, but we couldn't tell you because the law prevented us from telling you something. What do I tell those families? So I say that it sounds like a grave situation, but think about most of the school shooting that we've had.
Yeah.
That's what plays out the day after. So how do we look at those federal laws and not violating people's rights? So we're not posting things in newspaper. We're not assuming guilt before assessment of innocence, but we need to share information, even on the mental health side, where we can have a young person who could have been in a mental health facility all weekend and shows up on school on Monday, and we can't support that young person until that young person goes into crisis again. So even having that information to say, how do we, again, engage in this very comprehensive wraparound support for our children?
I think we're hearing that from law enforcement, too, of when they're trying to build these stories to help people. And I think the issue that you're relaying to us that I think we're going to have to think about how to do is how do you build a database that can be helpful but not hurtful, too, because we don't want permanent records.
Correct.
We don't want these
Correct.
things. So, okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, very comprehensive, and I appreciate a lot of the comments you have. I actually was writing a question down, and you answered it as I was writing. It was pretty funny. But one of the points that I wanted to make, and hopefully get your feedback on it, you mentioned the incident command system, and that's something that I think most schools and districts should be aware of, and the uniformity is definitely something that's necessary. I think one of the points that I think parents and communities need to understand, and maybe you can add to this, when the incident command system or safety protocol is activated, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a school shooting.
Correct.
In my district in Staten Island, we're in the New York City public school system. We have geographical districts, and Staten Island is much different than where I grew up in Brooklyn. And we actually had a shelter in for a deer running on New Dorp Lane, which is a commercial area. Brooklyn, you don't have deer. Staten Island, we have deer. Up here, I know you guys have deer. So it's, how do you think there's a way that a training program or workshops that you mentioned for the community and parents, where we can try and embed that in them, that it's not necessarily a school shooting? Do you have any tips on that, or?
Absolutely, and so one, even in our communication, we're always trying to send communication out in bite-sized morsels, because if you send too much stuff, people just get overwhelmed fast, right? And so we try to make sure people have an appreciation of it, and even the reunification is a good one. When a crisis happens on campus, or when we shut down a campus, it's not because it's doomsday. And I'll give you a small example. We had a situation where there was actually a police activity close to the school. And so to avoid what's happening with this, we reverted school buses to another school temporarily till the police activity was done. And so all of a sudden, people hear police activity, something must happen to school, people go haywire. So a big part of that then is, a part of our incident command is communication protocols with law enforcement, with fire, and then relayed to parents. So those communication protocols become a big part of it, and that also embeds into our practices when we do drills. So when we're doing drills, parents know that this is a drill. Here's some things we want to communicate. And the piece that we're doing now as a part of this series of symposium, if you will, is in fact talk about what's the role and responsibility of parents. And more important, for them to understand what our comprehensive safety protocols are. What's the incident command training? What does it actually mean? Unless you're in law enforcement or first responder, that's like a cute term. And so how do they understand what that actually means? So we have a gas leak on campus. We're shutting down the campus, shutting down a building, and we go right into the incident command protocol because we're trying to manage the situation as effectively as we can. So it's a mechanism to manage a crisis and not necessarily a mechanism that indicate what type of crisis we're managing.
What comes to mind is one of the tabletops we used to do. I'm a retired NYPD lieutenant, and I was also a school board president in Staten Island. What I was thinking of as you were saying that was you may have a car accident that has a fatality outside where your kindergarten through second graders get out. So you may shelter in so they don't see that trauma.
Correct.
So that's something that I was glad you hit on that. Switching gears a little, with the state education department's violent and disruptive incident reporting system, VIDIR, do you think there's anything that could be addressed to improve that reporting system? And maybe there's some data points that could be added or removed just from your experience.
So the answer is yes, because some of the terminology that's used varies between what a penal code says, how to define certain terms, and how education law under our code of conduct defines certain terms. And so certain things that could be reportable or not, and vice versa. And so we always get the call, well, you can't believe you guys didn't have any of those. Well, we didn't, based upon your definition. And so we're always looking at that. So at some point, I'll certainly be more than happy, and Assemblywoman Walsh, you're probably my closest contact, because we actually had that conversation this past summer as a part of that reporting sequence, saying that some of these terminology can be interpreted differently, right? And so that's important. It's important for us to do that because then that lends to the consistency in practices within our buildings, how we're reporting things within the buildings. And that also lends to a trend line to say, are we seeing more uptick in certain behaviors or actions or not? And it shouldn't be as a result of people's interpretation of some of the language, be it either school perspective or from a penal law perspective. And so that's where there's some rub with that. And so there's some fine tuning that actually to take place. It's a great reporting mechanism, but like anything else, we always have to review how does it align with the current times and current situations that we're dealing with in schools.
Do you think, given the capability, if it was possible, to use the VIDIR to provide supports and guidance for students? I know that we step into the area of FERPA and HIPAA with that, but that could be a vehicle that could be used to identify students in crisis where we could offer those supports. Do you think that's something that...
Well, so we live in a day of portals. You spend too much time logging into a portal to do something. So my answer is kind of yes, but let's not make it to the point where to access information becomes so onerous that people don't want to do it, right? And also let's not make it to the point where the people who need to access information, the counselors, the people at the ground level, can't. It's only certain people, and then, quite frank with you, it's not as effective. So with that being said, as much as we can, try to not just add another thing. If we could look at existing protocols or platforms, if you will, and try to tap into those things, great. Because the last thing, quite frankly, we need in school is another password.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, agreed. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen?
I just wanted to ask about the transportation, buses, what kind of, I receive a lot of calls from parents that, some of the bullying, some of the really early issues seem to arise on a bus. And I'm wondering, as far as monitoring, do you have monitors on your buses? Because I know not all school districts have the ability, the funding, the support.
So we are strategic about it. We know that there are certain bus routes because of the nature of kids and that we provide different supports for. We have video surveillance camera on buses, and kids know it. And so, it's funny when somebody knows that you get caught on camera, you act a little bit differently. But more importantly, because we also spend a lot of time in the beginning of the school year, particularly with our young students, doing bus drills, talking about roles and responsibilities and expectations on the bus, and also because our young people know that the bus is in fact an extension of the school experience. So I was on my way to school, I wasn't at school, or I was leaving school. Well, no, you're still within our charge. Students also know that the same accountability, if you will, or actually, let me put it the other way, the same expectation and responsibility that you should be carrying out as a young person applies within the bus as well. So those are the things. And while that's being said, it's an ongoing battle because we have the other battle of drivers. And so when you had consistency, and I just personalize it to myself, I've had 3 kids go through my system, and my daughter, who's now a sophomore in college, she still remember her 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade bus driver. Why? It was the same person. And that lady got to know every kid on that route to the point she could tell when they were having a good day, bad day, otherwise. And those days are gone. Now you're lucky if you have the same bus driver the next day in a week, because we are always piecemealing. And our transportation people do a great job. We have never had to change our schedule, our structure, because of driver shortage, and we've had significant driver shortage. But we piecemeal to make it happen. And while we bring kids to school, what's not happening as much as should happen is those consistent relationships that kids develop over time with the adult on that bus. And then kids live up to the expectation that adult has for that child, because remember, they're often the first person that's interacting with a young person, and often the last person that's interacting with a young person. So they play a significant role. And our drivers know that, so we do a lot of extensive training for our bus drivers. They understand the significance of their role and take their role very seriously and try to build those really authentic relationships with a young person, where you can just look at somebody like so-and-so's having a bad day. In some cases, it's a follow-up with hey, somebody should let the school know this kid's having a bad day. Somebody need to follow up with this young person. So those things oftentimes avert what could be a crisis for that young person during a school day.
Just brought back memories. I remember my bus driver all the way through high school. So, thank you.
I was terrified of mine because he was a retired cop. He scared the life out of me, Lenny. I was not a bad kid, but.
Ours was our ice cream man in the summer, so they did both.
Oh, that's good.
Good for
a little
sales,
carrot
I'm sure.
and stick kind of
That's
thing
right.
going on. Well, I want to thank both of you for all your work and for your thoughtful comments. I have more of a comment than a question. Well, maybe it's a question too. It seems like a lot, just as a society, I think one of the things that we're really grappling with is what's the appropriate use of technology to help rather than hurt. And I hear that in the comments that we've received so far. And I think as legislative members, we struggle with that issue too. One bill came to mind that I just wanted to mention. It was out in the Buffalo area. There was some Safe Schools money that went out. It was dispersed, and one school out that way had the idea of employing facial recognition software to help identify individuals coming in, or trying to come into the school, and that was halted. We voted on that to put a stop on that, at least temporarily. What is your here's the question: What's your thought about the use of that technology in the school? You're kind of laughing, so
I'm laughing because there's so many potential misuse, and so I say all the time, we take a measured approach with everything that we do. So we have to do the hypothesis. If we do this, what are all the potential good implications and what are all the potential bad implications? And if we can't control either of those consistently, we're probably not going to do it. And so that came up because we've had people offer 1,000 different things that we should do as a school system. And so we have to think about, does it address safety, but at what cost? Mm-hmm. And so those are the kind of things that we have to think about. with technology as we move forward. And technology is tremendous impact in how we function. And so we have to think about those things truly in terms of what are the other issues that may lend from that. So it's not necessarily is it good or bad. I'm not sure if as a society, even organizationally, we're ready to effectively use something like that within our schools. So to me, it's a big question mark still pending.
Yeah, that system had fatal flaws in it from the very beginning, and they dropped it. They dropped it because facial recognition doesn't work all the time.
Yeah.
Who's coming in, who's coming out. Controlling your doorways is more important than having a camera telling you who that might be. And when they do make a mistake, it's a big mistake.
Big, huge mistake.
So that's why they dropped it.
And I think we can solve that issue by raising the cap on the salaries so we have the same consistent security personnel there that know who's supposed to be in the building and know who's not supposed to be in the building. I remember when I was teaching lunch duty, you kind of know who's supposed to be in that cafeteria and you know who's not. So that helps, I think.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate you
Appreciate
having
it.
us.
That was very thorough. You can write our report for us now.
Tell me when you want it. Day after tomorrow? Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
it.
That's great.
Well, we've been talking quite a bit tonight already and listening about the need for mental health services within our school, outside of our school. And the next person I'd like to invite up is the Commissioner of the Department of Mental Health for Saratoga County, Dr. Michael Prezioso, who's also a good friend of mine and my neighbor too. So come on up, Michael. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Assemblywoman and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity. I came in much more organized and prepared. I did submit written testimony. I was going to also summarize that. After hearing the two speakers prior, I'm going to lead with, I did not ride the bus, I was a walker. So I do not remember my bus driver. I really think much of what I included in my written testimony is just an extension of what we've already heard this evening. The training components that Captain Morley spoke about, and we speak multiple times per week, more and more conversations with around SRO-related issues, other issues. Our interface often occurs around the issuing of pickup orders under Section 945 in the mental hygiene law. So we talk about that, and more recently discussing ways to build and enhance the system within the context of the school's own threat assessment processes, law enforcement's obligations, and the authority that mental health has to direct the removal of someone to Saratoga's hospital for assessment and evaluation of need for psychiatric admission. This will cut to the issue of resources. The resources around children's services are extraordinarily limited. Within the provision of psychological services, psychiatric services, there are proportionately and significantly fewer child experts than there are folks with more generalized expertise. So it's critically important, and we hear often enough, unfortunately, stories of children brought to the emergency room who do require admission someplace but wait periods of days, if not weeks on some occasions, for admission to one of those facilities. To me, we can talk about the ways that we structure and develop processes to address acute needs and then more long-term needs of kids. And I'm talking about kids, preschool age through elementary, through secondary school. But without the resources to provide the service, we can develop the most extraordinary, elegant schematics for the way the process works. And ultimately, it results in, and we heard about this often enough at the CIT program, training, and also work that I've had the opportunity to do with the folks at Shen, we need to have people to refer kids to. And those are where the limitations are. So really good workarounds, but not sufficient workarounds. Many of the school systems, I see Burnt Hills here also, will contract with outside agencies. It's less expensive in some ways for outside agencies, nonprofit agencies, to provide counseling staff to supplement what's already in place in the schools. And I think that's useful and important. Need to be more much of the support for that, whether they're generating revenue through fees for services that they do, or some of that is passed through state aid to the different agencies themselves to offset some of their costs, which allow them then to develop these resources. But we need to do more, in my opinion, related to recruitment and retention.
Yeah.
What are the pathways that get people into the business to begin with? And unfortunately, to get to the point of being able to provide service independently, you're talking about an undergraduate education and a graduate education, typically of 2 years, licensing process and things like that. The pipeline is not a short pipeline, and the need is immediate. So if I would do anything, it would be to encourage you to look at ways to help with the recruitment and retention of staff with this particular kind of expertise. We struggle with that, and the field has struggled with that for a number of years anyway, related to attrition, numbers of folks kind of aging out, going into retirement. I think the model of having retired folks come back and provide services in the schools, I think that's terrific. There are pension, risks associated with all of that, and that's certainly a consideration for people too. But if anything, I would urge that. I would echo what Captain Morley said about training, particularly crisis intervention training. I had the good fortune to work with him to develop the grant that brought that training to Saratoga County. So while he was up here talking, I was able to Google it, and it is the Institute for Law Enforcement, Mental Health, and Community Collaboration. One of the nice things about it is that they provide, in addition to the funding for the training, which is pretty intensive, it's a 40-hour training, but while you're doing that, you're taking someone off the road. So they do provide support for overtime. Any opportunities to provide that kind of financial support to a training that's going to make a difference, I think, is something important to continue. Number of times heard reference to emergency medical services. I should mention I'm a psychologist by training, commissioner at the county's Department of Mental Health and Addictions, assistant professor at Albany Med, but I'm also an EMT, so I've gotten much closer to what that end of the contact with kids is about. One of the things that strikes me, and I'd like to advocate with you for this, is that when I issue an order under Section 945 of the Mental Hygiene Law, that's a pickup order, it directs the removal of a person to a hospital for evaluation. Now, the hospital doesn't have to admit someone on the 945. They make a clinical assessment and determine. One of the work, some of the work that we continue to do is around understanding how each of the systems work. There are specific criteria for admission, but no matter what, there's different interpretations of what that criteria means. I think that's a subject of many of Captain Morley and my discussions, and certainly with some of the school systems too, about why certain admissions don't take place. But the position that I hold as Director of Community Services, there is one of me in every county, and those orders get issued through the office that we hold. Only certain people are eligible to make reports to us of a person that they have concern about. That would be parents, adult children, adult siblings, treating psychiatrists, nursing staff, social workers, that sort of thing. That's important. It also includes peace officers and law enforcement. Who it does not include is emergency services personnel.
Okay.
And if we're talking about a kid in psychiatric distress and we want to do everything we can to get the right responders to the location in the right amount of time to deliver the right kind of care, it's not that law enforcement may or may not be necessary, but I would love to advocate for emergency medical technicians and paramedics to be added to the list of people who can make a report to my office, who can then ask for, based on their observations of the person's clinical condition, for a pickup order. We can use that, and we can then coordinate with groups that have already been mentioned tonight. Mobile crisis team, county's fortunate to have a mobile crisis team in place, does work with adults. There's also opportunity to work with with youth. We're extending services to develop a youth ACT team, assertive community treatment team. This is for kids and adults also on the adult side, much more intensive services than they might get instead of sort of the once a week psychotherapy visit your counselor once a week and then see your psychiatrist once a month or once every 2 months or so. So those are the kinds of things that have been developed to help account for and adjust for the lack of fundamental foundational resources, which is the people in place to be able to do the work everyone here is interested in making referrals to those with expertise. There aren't enough of those people. We talk often around my office about what possibilities there are. Are there opportunities for funded internships to attract people at the undergraduate level into the field? Funded internships for people at the graduate level who may then have a form of student loan forgiveness for a period of time after agreeing to work. What it does is it develops interest, it gives people training in the field, and it gives the agencies the opportunity to develop professionals and then have a ready pool of applicants for jobs as they become available. So we'd like to see those kinds of things also.
Excellent.
Open to your questions.
Just a really quick question. So for the mental health law 945 that was mentioned, how quick can you turn that around? And do they have to go to you as the commissioner, or is there someone that's a designee?
There are designees. Most of my counterparts, I think, have designees. Otherwise, our own phones would be ringing 24/7. But there are designees, and depending on the county, because if you've seen one county, you've seen one county. They have different processes in place, so they're turned around relatively quickly, particularly during the day. The phone call would come in. A series of questions is asked to determine what the presentation of the person is looking like. Then the form is filled out. It's pretty easy. Notification is made to the hospital in our case and to law enforcement, and the order gets faxed, and then it gets executed.
Is it just for
quickly.
children, or forgive my ignorance
Children
on this?
and adults.
Oh, and adults, okay. So like if you're talking about adding, right now, can a state trooper do that? They can, but a paramedic can't?
So a state trooper can make that call. Any law enforcement here can make that call to my office, and EMS cannot. And I think I find that to be troubling because by the nature of the work that EMS does, you're making assessments about a person's capacity. You're making determinations about whether there's a psychiatric call. And I've been involved in situations more recently where there has been a person in psychiatric distress, and EMS will need to contact law enforcement so that law enforcement can make the call to my office. We can cut that part out by folks with what I understand of the training that law enforcement receives versus what EMS receives. At least comparable, but likely much more training in psychiatric matters than law enforcement gets. So I think that any help that you can offer with that would be outstanding.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah. Mike?
Commissioner, I have one question that you actually, I'm intrigued by it because as you mentioned, the section 945 and getting to the hospital and the evaluation, is there anything in state policy, state law, that can improve the relationship, or the process when the evaluation's taking place in the hospital? Because I think you indicated that sometimes the interpretation or the evaluation by the doctor is disconnected from the 945 order. Am I clarifying that enough?
It's like, if I understand your question, it's a two-stage process. So the 945 will get the person to the hospital for the evaluation. At that point, it's the provider at the hospital who makes the decision as to whether or not the person is someone who should be admitted or not. And clinicians will disagree on a daily basis about whether a certain individual meets that threshold or not. But I know that we continue to try and have conversations with the hospital about the interpretation. Generally, it includes presence of a mental illness, present risk of harm to self or others. And often, the place where there's some disagreement is that part that says the condition exists and treatment and an inpatient facility is necessary for the treatment of the individual. Others will interpret that as, will the person benefit from hospitalization? So there's a lot of gray area there. I think that the interpretation is, if hospitalization is necessary to treat the individual, you admit them. Not so much whether they will benefit. It's very close. It's a very subtle shade of gray. But then you're taking a look at, well, what do you mean by benefit from? If you take someone out of a conflictual environment and they're not able to manage it because they haven't taken certain medications, so their mood is discontrolled, their thinking deteriorates, hospitalization can offer an environment that's safe, structured, stable, allows a reassessment of the medications, the efficacy of the medications at that particular time. versus saying, well, you're not saying you're going to kill yourself or somebody else at this moment, so you're okay to go just follow up with your therapist. That happens. That's a problem. And it happens with adults, and it happens with children at times, too.
Commissioner, thank you. You know, it's, to get a little personal here, my mom suffered from mental illness from the time I was 7 when my brother was born. And what you just described is what my life was like with my mom, where you'd go to the hospital and I guess that evaluation was going on. So obviously this has been going on for decades.
Sure.
So if there's any way that we can offer, you know, we can get any recommendations to fix that, you know, this is, you know, just pulls at the heartstring. Thank you.
Be glad
Appreciate
to
it.
talk with you, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gentlemen?
I have a question. They're admitted to the hospital. They're released. Who needs to be notified? Anybody?
I'm a little reluctant to speak for the hospital and the specific,
Any-
but I will say generally, because I did work for almost 20 years in the state hospital in Albany. The general practice is to identify needs and supports at the time of discharge. That could be family members, that could be treatment resources. It's not necessarily someone who law enforcement might come in frequent contact with. It's not necessarily the schools.
See, I want to take it full circle. If you listen to the other doctor, his complaint was that the information isn't shared. When we do anything medical, quite frankly, and we've studied a lot of medical with the MRT, the Medicaid Redesign
Yeah.
System.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter is you can't share that information. You're not allowed to. So even though law enforcement might give you the 945, and they may be admitted or not admitted, the results of that exam and any of the information related to that is not shareable. Is that correct?
That's correct. I feel law enforcement, the schools, law enforcement are in a very difficult situation. I can't tell you the number of times Captain Morley and I have had discussions, usually about 10 o'clock on a Sunday night. Please help me understand why this person who we brought to the hospital because they had a rope tied around their neck and we brought the rope wasn't admitted. Situations with people threatening harm to others, not being admitted, going back to the same location, in this case with a BB gun, if I remember correctly. You know, these are the kinds of things that happen. And law enforcement finds out when they see the person back on the street.
And you know that most of those guys, if they're adults, end up in his jail because they have nowhere else to put them. And the government, our government, the New York State government, has closed a lot of those kind of facilities, and you don't have a lot of resources out there. One more question about certification. At what point can you give somebody certification? 2-year degree, 4-year degree, graduate degree?
You can, an undergraduate degree and 2 years of education, typically for a social work level degree, a master's in social work, or licensed mental health counselor.
And you mentioned that you need to have that pipeline and
Yeah.
a conduit. Where I'm from, it's recruit and retention. We grow our own. I mean, we don't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
People don't really come to my rural area unless you're from there and you realize how great it is to live there. But other than that, you have to, you know, we're looking at that with all professionals, doctors, dentists, lawyers,
Yeah.
accountants. We can't find enough right now. And then we're talking about public service. Again, as the mental health commissioner, we have had a big brain drain in the state of New York of people retiring quite frequently and in huge numbers. And the sheriff's departments and teachers and all public service has had that problem. We're not sure what the answer to that is. And then if you're talking, again, a pipeline that could take that long to replace somebody that just retires. And the other part of it is your waiver. The 211 waiver is meant to give you people that are already qualified. So they're supposed to waive, you know, again, the state of New York should be waiving that so they can work beyond the $35,000 limit. We have proposals and have had them in the assembly for a while from our conference to, again, raise that ceiling to something better. Especially, I can see with mental health. I mean, I tend to be a criminal justice guy, but with mental health, they're so unique. Where you, like you said, you can't find them. So if somebody retires, say from your county, and they're willing to come back part-time and work in his school, we're going to keep them professionals at $35,000. Kind of rhetorical question. I thank you.
And I'll leave it there, but I agree completely with what you're saying. We need to find a way to do more of this and develop those pipelines. I will say that the pandemic had a significant impact. Telehealth was a thing prior to the pandemic. It exploded during the pandemic. Subsequent to the pandemic, companies emerged, they exploded, telehealth companies contracting with insurance companies to develop and that's reasonable. I personally don't think that telehealth is as effective. If you have no other choice, it's probably okay. But there was a huge draw on the remaining staff because when you're doing telehealth, you can do it on your schedule, you can do it from your house. We lost, I think, about 5 people last summer who were younger people, starting families, things like that. Now, when the company offers you the opportunity to do essentially the same work from your house when you can, and you have the same salary and essentially the same kind of fringe package that you did previously, what public sector entity is going to forgive? And as that exploded too, the rise in the number of people, what people charge for doing private work has also exploded. I have former students who charge $150, $200, $250 an hour, and they're not dealing with insurance companies because the demand is so great and the supply is so low that you can do that sort of thing. So there's a number of economic factors that are impinging on that.
I'm glad you spoke about that because I know that with my oldest son who has needed counseling with a fantastic local psychologist for many years, and he's had that consistent person for many years, but it's all been private pay out of pocket. And I mean, I feel fortunate that my family can do it, but there are huge equity issues with that. It's not, and I see that in my work in family court, where there are a lot of families who can't. And I'm so gratified that the school districts are contracting to bring in mental health services because I honestly didn't even know with my son. I thought a school psychologist was like gonna do counseling, and it's like no, that's not the role.
Different.
And it's to administer testing primarily, and that was a huge learning curve for me. But the pipeline issues are fascinating to me, and I think I'd love to start to work on that issue because I'm so familiar. We have 4 Winds here as a resource, but it's heartbreaking to hear you say that there could be a young child who is brought into the ER and has to park it there for a significant amount of time. How traumatizing is that before they can reach and be appropriately treated at 4 Winds or some other place?
And often enough, it's complicated by the fact that it's not local. 4 Winds is the only local resource, but
are they maxed out, Mike?
The last time I spoke, which was not super recently, but within the last 2 months, they're flat out. They're also developing a partial hospitalization program for adolescents, which is very much needed. That level of care is wonderful and appropriate. I think it'll be a real value to the school systems. But the hardship comes when a place is finally identified for a child and that place is not local, because then you're removing potentially the child from familiar surroundings. Moving them someplace across the state is an additional burden for the family to be able to get there. And all of those pieces really help surround and support the child who's struggling to begin with. And if you lose those pieces, it just becomes that much more difficult. And then the child will be released and the school won't know what's gone on, so what's the school left with? This is a conversation. I'm the black sheep of my family. They're either school teachers or nurses, so I'm the only one who went to the dark side. But it's that kind of thing, and this discussion happens all the time. Why don't we know? We should know, and you should.
That was actually going to be my question. Like, where do you take these students? Because we definitely have an issue across the state where they're being rushed to the state hospitals. In my area, fortunately, we have a really good hospital. Stony Brook University Medical Center is right up the block. They're rushing there. We had a fight some years ago with then Governor Cuomo was looking to close down on Long Island Sagamore Children's Psychiatric Hospital, and there were many others. And we had that fight about, they had talked about a close-to-home initiative, keeping people close that are incarcerated to their families. And we said, why not students who have mental health issues, keep them close to their families? So where is this the facility you were just speaking about, where the closest would be?
It's a
Or-
private facility that's
Oh, that's
right in
where-
downtown
right.
Saratoga Springs, but that's not where a lot of our kids go.
So they're then going
So
elsewhere.
they go other places, yeah, and it's a hardship. It's a hardship on the kid, and it's a hardship on the family.
Right.
And I would add, the facilities, the hospitals and healthcare facilities in the North Country are even further away from.
Absolutely.
It's a real issue north of Saratoga. Four Winds is, the common place in this area, but even that from some of the northern areas is a real challenge.
It's harder to get to.
Or further south.
I can't even imagine the
Utica, I'm not
challenges.
sure.
What's that?
Wasn't there a facility in Utica, state facility?
Mohawk
Is that
Valley,
still?
there's, right. The loss of state psychiatric beds, there's a ripple effect. It's significant whether we're talking about adults or kids. Really significant because with fewer beds available in a state facility, those folks who get into the hospital at the local level, there are fewer beds because some of the folks who are more chronically ill, more severely ill, would have been in the state hospital. Well, they fall to the local beds. And when the local beds are full, those same folks don't get that level of care. So there's a ripple effect from
Yeah.
the closure
That's a
of
good
all
point.
those beds that's really devastating, and I think that's, potential contributing factor to why jail populations are comprised so heavily of folks with mental health and addictions-related needs, issues potentially related to homelessness too. There's a lot that occurred as a result of the closure of those beds. And very recently, as I was talking with our hospital's behavioral health executive, talking about the fact that from time to time, hospitals that we would otherwise access or members of our region would access, Albany Medical Center, Capital District Psych Center, Ellis Hospital, Samaritan Hospital, will at times, because of their staffing issues, go on what they call diversion, which means where do you send them? And it's like a set of dominoes that falls.
Yes.
And it's just extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
Wow, okay. Well, I think we've asked you as many questions as we can think of. And thank you so much for your time, and thank you
Sure,
for your
thank you all.
testimony. And it's always wonderful to work with you and hear from you.
You too.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks. So with that, we're going to go back to the beginning with law enforcement and invite Stephen M. Rothwine, Senior, who is the Troop G School and Community Outreach Coordinator, to join us.
Hi.
Hi, good evening. Thank you very much for being with us.
Absolutely. I apologize for my apprehension about testifying, but when you tell a copy has to come and testify or give testimony, we're like, no, that's not going to happen.
I definitely get it.
Totally get it.
So I wasn't sure what to expect and what this was all about, but listening to our previous speakers, I just kind of came up with some bullet points of things that maybe weren't discussed, because I agree with what the previous speakers have talked about, and certainly the mental health issue and the programs that are needed are huge. But from a law enforcement standpoint, I'm thinking more kind of reactive to a situation. Just to give you a little bit of my background real quick, I've got 30 plus years in with the state police. I am the Troop G School and Community Outreach Coordinator, so I cover a 10-county area in upstate New York. And I oversee, I'm the liaison more or less with any of the school districts that require law enforcement assistance. So there's a lot more that I do with businesses and such, but I was an SRO for 7 years when the state police had the SRO program. And I worked in a pretty rural district, Vernon Knox Westerlo, for those of you that are familiar with the area. I cannot stress enough the importance of the SRO program. I don't care what law enforcement agency is in a school, but the benefits to that are huge. We are not there, law enforcement, as many people think that we're there to make arrests, and we're there to walk around the halls with a baton in our hand, making sure kids are in the class. That is the least amount of what we do. We play father figure to so many students, and I still have students today that are in their 30s that see me and hey, Trooper Steve, and you made a difference in their life. So I know the SRO program came up, and I can't back that enough. as I go out to schools and I do security assessments, there are over 300 school buildings within Troop G and 80-some school districts. Some of the things that I see that are in need, and I think it all comes down to funding, right? Everyone's funding, and I understand that, but it came up briefly when the captain was up here about hardening our schools. Not making them jails per se, but to harden them up. So exterior hardening, whether it be, some sort of a bullet-resistant type of film that could be added to the glass, making sure that there's like a double entrance where 2 sets of doors are locked. Giving schools maybe there's a Raptor program, if any of you are familiar with that, but certainly hardening up the exterior. However, throughout my years of doing this, I have found that the majority of school shootings are students or former students, and the weapon is already inside the school. So what have we done? We can bulletproof glass the entire exterior of the building, but that threat's already inside, and I can go over school shooting after school shooting after school shooting where the threat is already inside your school. So what have we done to harden up the interior? So we're talking about ballistic doors and ballistic windows in the doors. I do training with school districts on shutting and closing the door after instruction begins, so that we can keep bad guy from entering into our classrooms. And even as recently as Uvalde, where the subject made entry into the school, how great would it have been to see him be met with a locked door and a locked door and a locked door, never being able to gain entry into where the students are. So I know that we had the Safe Schools, I believe you brought it up, ma'am, the funding for that, the Safe Schools program, and I believe that is needed because schools are not being able to harden their districts as they would like to. I know when I worked at Byrne, when you went in the front entry, the office was down the hallway, one was up the stairs to the left and around the corner, where that front office needs to be at the front entry so that you can vet who's coming into the school. That took 10 years for them to get a capital project together after I left the school, and they finally made all of those changes. So again, it just comes down to being able to have the money to do those type of things. Another aspect came up here, a reporting system, and Shen said they have a 24/7 reporting system for their students and or parents. I think that's huge. I think it was upwards of 70% or more of school shootings, others knew about it. And what do we constantly hear? Well, I don't want to get involved, I don't want my name associated, or I didn't know who to say something to. So having some sort of a reporting system in place for the schools, I think is huge. Okay. And this may be a little off topic here, but when it comes to the law, for parents that have allowed their child to get a hold of a weapon should be held accountable for the same infraction of law that their child has committed, in my book. So I believe students and youth are getting their hands on weapons too readily because we have parents that are not locking these things up as they should be. If the law was changed, maybe parents would do a better job of securing weapons if they knew the penalties were steep. And lastly, I believe a standardized security assessment statewide for schools, so that our SROs, our law enforcement agencies, when they go out to do a security assessment, we're bringing the same information out to all the schools. When I drive around throughout the districts that I'm at, some of the schools are lettered and marked, the entrance points, the school windows are marked, others have absolutely nothing. And I know that they are recommendations and schools don't have to follow our recommendations, but maybe if they were mandated to follow these protocols that we put into place, Knox boxes so law enforcement can enter into the school, things like that. And again, I could go on, but I just wanted to kind of make those points about hardening up our schools and making our schools safer.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah. So with respect to the SRO program, because something that I'm hearing as we're traveling to these schools, part of it, is there a teaching component that's required as part of it? Because I'm hearing downstate that some of our SROs also have to, almost not like a DARE program per se, but they are, when they're in the schools, they are engaging in that as well. And I wonder, as helpful as that could be, if you think that, is that a requirement, or is that currently as the interpretation?
So I went through the SRO program 20 years ago. I'm sure things have changed. Maybe the captain could speak a little bit more on that.
Sorry.
But yeah, public speaking or speaking is certainly a huge point. Going out and doing bullying or internet safety and all of that is an important component of being an SRO, absolutely.
Yeah, because I was just wondering if that was something that, I don't want to say hinders, because obviously we love those programs, but not every officer needs to be the one to deliver those programs. And I think in parts of the state, we would love to see that increased partnership where it sounds like you folks have really figured this out. Other parts of the state, I think, are still working on that partnership with law enforcement and in the schools. And then you talked about unequal buildings. That's something I'm fortunate to probably about once a month, I'm in a different school building throughout my district and on Long Island talking to kids. And I see that. I mean, you mentioned, it was mentioned here tonight that every room has a key card. So we definitely see unequal footing on that. In my assembly district now, every school just recently now has a vestibule, security vestibule. And that was something that parents had been demanding, and obviously that presents its own issues because you want to also do visitor management as parents come to pick up their kids. I remember one of the schools, the issues the day that this was installed, they had an adult that was picking up a kid every single day. They ran their ID in the system the first day it started, and they realized, they're a registered sex offender. They actually can't be on the school grounds. They didn't know that the day before. So I think is that something you're also kind of advocating that we try to upgrade the buildings the best we can?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I agree with that. Yeah, any way that we can, and again, if we look at history and the history of active shooters, it's not really the parents, right? The parents aren't the problem. Yes, we do need to vet who's in our schools, and we do need to make sure that this parent doesn't have an order of protection against them, that they're not supposed to be picking up that child. And that is important. But I think if we can spend money a little bit differently, again, a lot with the mental health component, but also the hardening of our school districts.
Thank you.
Sure.
Gentlemen?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. So we're doing all right.
Yeah.
Time-wise, we're doing okay, I think, hopefully. The next person I'd like to invite up is my school superintendent and friend, Dr. Patrick McGrath.
I'd be glad to come and answer questions. I definitely don't have any, my colleague here to my left covered pretty much everything that I would say.
Okay.
But I appreciate that.
That's cool. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. How about Britta Donovan from Galway? Is Britta here? I didn't see her.
Nope.
She's not here. Very good. All right. So how about Tina Crago? Crago, am I saying that right? From, I call it the Charlton School, but it's the Ketchum Grand Memorial School, I guess is the formal name. Is she here? No? Yes?
She is.
No? Yes?
Maybe
No?
not.
No? Okay. That's easy. All right. Well, then my other friend, Pat Ziegler, is here as the school board member at Burn Hills Boston Lake High School. Thanks for being here, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. I'll tell you that as a school board member for 7 years, I can't say anything better than the gentlemen already have. From law enforcement, from our schools, our old friend Mike Prezioso. So I guess my role as a board member is just to follow up on everyone's comments by saying the reality is I think it is a funding issue, and I think most of us understand that, but maybe I can put a finer point on that. I think Dr. Robinson put very well how important it is for children to see the same people day in and day out, and for those same people to see those children day in and day out, and that even a bus driver can identify someone, and we've seen this in Burn Hills. We've had several instances we've seen in the past couple of years where it has been a bus driver that's noticed something a little bit different with a student and was able to bring that information to someone else in the school district so that student could be addressed, and we could look into that a little bit further and find out what was happening with that student. Now, in some cases, obviously, this is just to do our job as a school, identify a child in crisis, which Quite honestly, 7 years ago when I started on the school board, our board reviews that came in from all of our different schools and departments were focused predominantly on test scores and donations they were looking for, and maybe some things they wanted to do a little bit differently in the classroom. And increasingly over that time, sadly, what we're hearing at every single program review is the fact that we just have so many students in crisis and we can't support them all. Now, you've already heard that from experts that work in the field, and Dr. Prezioso put this really well already. The only thing I can tell you as a board member is it's not only disheartening, but honestly, sometimes it's a little bit outrageous that in a state that has Wall Street in your district, we can't seem to fund the programs that support the neediest people among us, and that's our children. The fact that we're talking about hardening schools and creating vestibules, and that some schools can't do it, and it takes 10 years for them to get a safety vestibule in, so we can make sure we put that one additional level of safety between our students and a potential gunman. The fact that we have students, and we've heard this from our social workers just a couple of months ago, that we have students that are in crisis, potentially at the point of taking their own life, and they go 3 weeks before they can get in and see someone. And as Mike Prezioso pointed out, Dr. Prezioso has pointed out, the telehealth doesn't quite meet the need, and we don't have enough beds, and we don't have enough counselors, and we don't have enough people in the schools. Now, one of the things we've tried to do at BHBL, I'm sure other schools are doing the same, is have a psychologist and a social worker in every building. But again, Dr. Prezioso shared how we do outsource for some of those positions. And that's fine. We've gotten some phenomenal people by outsourcing to some local organizations. But the reality is, it's a little bit cheaper for us. It also means that it's not quite the same position for those individuals. And what that means is turnover. What it means is that you get people who are coming in from outside organizations when we outsource, and I don't know if I have all the names right, so I'll leave that to Dr. McGrath, but we outsource to some wonderful organizations. We get some phenomenal people in. They're there for 3-4 years. They're building the relationships you talked about with some of the neediest students that are at risk of potentially doing harm to themselves or others, and then they get a job that has perhaps state benefits, and they move to another school district, and you're bringing someone else in. So we're trying to put full-time, benefits-eligible BHBL employees in all of those positions in every district. And then we talk about SROs. We just got a second SRO. As the Assemblywoman knows, coming from our district, we are able to fund those 2 SROs on our own. But could there be years where it's going to be difficult to do that? I should point out our district covers part of Saratoga and part of Schenectady County. So we contract with the Saratoga Sheriffs as well as with the Glenville Police. And because they're here, I'll tell you, and I'm sure they know this, but if you could clone Officer Zach Sicardi from Saratoga and Cody Maggs from Glenville and send them out around the rest of the state, you'd be here in some very happy school districts. They're as good as you're going to find. But that funding is an issue that comes out of our general fund to pay for those gentlemen. And I wouldn't trade it for the world, but I'll tell you what, we hear from parents as school board members when there's a shooting somewhere else on the opposite end of the country, and I was about 30 miles from Uvalde when that happened. And I fly home, and the next day I'm driving my kids to school, and you've got a Saratoga police cruiser there, or the Glenville Police Department sitting at the middle school. You got a lot of parents that know their kids are safe, but the funding is the issue. And the only thing I'll close with, because again, I feel like I was set up here by the Assemblywoman just to harass you for money, but it's okay.
We'll take it.
But I don't mind doing it because of where that money is going, is that obviously the best thing we can do is try and address those students who are in crisis before they become a threat to themselves or others. And that's where addressing the mental health components early on, and then of course having the school resource officers to address those threats when they come up. Educational institutions are human resource intensive. It could be primary, secondary, tertiary, short cycle, makes no difference. Education is all about people and putting people in those positions. Dr. Robinson used the phrase, if you see something, say something. It's a great phrase, and coming from downstate, it looks good on the side of subways. But the reality is you have to have someone to say something to, and then someone to help address that student and their particular needs. And the reality is, we need funding to do that. And the money's going to the right places, as you've heard from all these fantastic people here. But we propose budgets to the district on an annual basis, and we're doing the best we can to fill those needs. But I think Dr. Robinson, again, put it so well. You're trying to decide, does that money go into academics? Does it go into extracurriculars? Does it go into mental health? Does it go into an SRO? How do you meet all those needs? And sadly, over the 7 years I've been on the school board, the mental health needs and the need for security in our schools has increased every single year. And that's tremendously sad. It's gut-wrenching. But that's the reality. That's the job these people, and Dr. McGrath, who's phenomenal, that's the job that these people are trying to address, and we just need a little help from the state doing it as board members and as taxpayers. So that's all I got. Thank you.
That was a very pleasant way to shake us down for money. It was very pleasant, Patrick. I appreciate it.
You catch more flies with honey, right? So
That's right.
very true.
No, that's
But
great.
Thank you. Thanks
Do we
for
have any
the
questions?
Yeah,
for
I
Patrick?
think what you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I think you have sympathetic ears here because we realize that spending money early on to help create productive citizens and not incarcerate people and not have people that are not able to be productive in society. Obviously, that saves a lot. I know in certain parts of the state, I think it was as high as $900 a day to incarcerate people. I don't know how many people make $900 a day, but not a lot of the people I spend time with. So that's a lot of money that we're spending. So if we can spend a little bit better and help make well-adjusted adults, I think that's kind of what you're advocating for. And it's actually a fiscally conservative message, I think.
It's
ultimately.
fiscally conservative, and quite honestly, it's just the right thing to do. And we hear this a lot. We hear that we should be data-driven in our decision-making, and the data is very clear. You can't educate a student if the student's hungry, so we have lunch programs. You can't educate a student if the student doesn't know what he's going home to, or he's afraid he's going to be abused when he gets home, so you have to address that need. You can't educate a student if the student is suffering from some type of a mental health crisis. As the Assemblywoman and I have talked about this in the past, and they have certain needs that we can address in the school. If we can do that, then the child can be educated. And quite honestly, was it JFK, a child miseducated is a child lost, right? So I think it's just the right thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you
for
for
the
your
invite.
time. Thank you. All right. I'm wondering if Robin DeLuca Aconi, am I pronouncing that correctly, is here? Hello, welcome. From the New York State School Social Work Association. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So I have my computer, I didn't print it out, but I don't want to belabor, so I should actually introduce myself. Thank you first for having me. So my name is Dr. Robin DeLuca. I spent 20 years as a school social worker and now am a clinical assistant professor at Stony Brook, actually, from Long Island, if you didn't get it from my accent yet.
It's not as bad as it is.
So, where I'm trying to, figure out, everyone has just said such incredible things, and so I don't want to belabor, everything that everyone said. There's two things that kind of struck me, but I do want to talk, especially now in my position at Stony Brook, as I'm the assistant dean at the School of Social Work, is that pipeline.
Yep.
So in order to be a social worker, I know that we had spoken about it before, if you get your bachelor's in social work, you can actually get your master's in social work in a year. So, to me, that's like the easiest way, not the easiest way, but the most efficient way to get someone into, as far as, I speak on the part of social work. And, but the biggest thing, especially with some of my students from downstate, we have a site in the city, is the fact that they need to intern 21 hours a week, which is unpaid, which is really hard, for, a lot of the students that I work with, that they end up dropping out because they have families, to support, and they have things that they need to do, and to give up 21 hours a week is really just a privilege for, to few. So I think that's, to have, and I know there's other states, I want to say it's Illinois and California is the other one, that are really looking into actually having paid internships for school mental health. And I think, working across that line would be something incredibly helpful, especially coming from a SUNY and again from a feeder school that is serving such a diverse population throughout the island and the city. So that would be, I guess, my ask, my funding ask, which would be the other route is for social work is to get your master's. If, for instance, if you don't get your bachelor's in social work and you have your bachelor's, like let's say in psychology, then it is 2 years to get your master's. And in that program, it is 14 hours internship. But the same thing, to have a paid internship would be life-changing for a lot of people. So that was that one thing. We surveyed our membership before coming here. So I speak we had over about 82 respondents. And it basically, the school social workers throughout the island, throughout the state, we had suburban, urban, rural. The themes were the same over and over and over. You know, the mental health and nowhere to basically help the children. This is just a quote: "Our children are walking around riddled with anxiety, depression, suicide ideation, high absenteeism, no pride for anything, ready to fight all the time. They feel emboldened, lost, defensive, alone, unheard, unprotected, and there's no positive options. There's no programs, not enough mental health providers, not enough anything for these kids or their families. We need more funding for mental health support, healthy meals that the kids will actually eat, enrichment, extracurricular activities, facility maintenance, upkeep, and clothing and other hygienic basic needs that kids can get from school." So this, from our members, was echoed over and over and over again. Just trying to figure out how to help the students that they work with. So the other thing I guess I wanted to bring up that because of course you heard all about the mental health needs, is just the impact of trauma on the developing brain. So, the Harvard Center on the Developing Child has decades of research showing that when a child experiences strong, frequent, prolonged adversity, exposure to violence, that the stress response systems disrupt the development of the brain architecture, right? And this trauma brain, like the gentleman before me spoke about, that's not the brain that learns, it's not the brain that connects, it's the brain that stays disconnected and in a life of just survival and not thriving. So, the other big ask that the school social workers who responded to it through New York State was talking about training for trauma-informed schools, resources, so that the SROs understand what the manifestation of trauma looks like, right? So, for administrators to have the understanding of, the trauma response, the trauma brain, and what needs to happen for our children to heal their trauma brain. That was, those to me were the biggest takeaways from the survey that we did. And there's also, and this is something that, when I teach my students, that because it always stuck with me, that in the wake of Columbine, the Secret Service released a report called the Safe School Initiative. And since that report, what was found in the report has been replicated over and over and over, that school shooters report mental health problems such as depression, suicide, and suicidal thoughts. And the Secret Service found that even in the presence of armed officers, that if the connection between youth and adults in the school is severed, then no place is safe. So again, just helping schools understand and connect with our children and not have our children have this sense of being alone, and being disconnected from the larger school environment. So there's more in here. I could actually send you some of the other things that
that would be great.
From the survey. But to me, that those were like kind of the things that I wanted to touch on. The one other thing is, again, a lot of our survey, they spoke about the fact that they really appreciated school resource officers, that they lent a sense of security, that they served to create an environment of safety. But just, however, there were some schools that reported that school safety and police officers actually have caused more anxiety, depending on, the population that they were in and what needed to be, the sense of trust that needed to be cultivated. So, yeah.
Nice job.
Thank you. Thank you. Could you tell I was a little nervous?
Yeah, that's great. Do we have any questions?
What are your thoughts on, and it's something that might be a heavy lift, I know, are you from the island?
I'm, Huntington.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's Keith Brown's area, neck of the woods.
Okay. All right.
Very cool. Andy Ray area. One of the things that my predecessor in the Assembly, who you may have known of, Al Graff, I think it was 2011, he introduced a bill for a nurse loan repayment program where nurses that agreed to work in underserved communities would get some assistance. And it was great that finally, it took years, but it was some fashion of it was in this year's state budget. So obviously that's a 10-year wait. We don't have 10 years for mental health.
Right.
But something of that nature, I think, is kind of what you're speaking of, some additional help that maybe we could advocate for. Would that be helpful if there was some kind of, or additional assistance?
I think it'd be incredibly helpful. I mean, like nursing, social work is tough. I spent 20 years, like I said, on the island as a social worker, and it's tough. And we want people who are up to that challenge, and at the same time not laden with debt. So again, to be able to support people who want to support our children, I think is essential, and being able to cultivate a workforce. To me, I hear it all across the island. We had a summit with mental health providers, especially out east on the island. That basically it's a desert as far as mental health, and that's what they just talked about, is you have to help us increase increase the workforce.
And I think you hit the nail on the head with the 21 hours of unpaid internship. I was the first one in my family to go to college, so when I did my internship of student teaching, also unpaid,
Yes.
problematic, because I sat there and there were times where I'm like, wow, I had to work a job, do multiple classes,
Right.
do that for many hours,
Right.
and then you sit there and you still need money to put gas in your car to get to that. So I'm sure your students are facing that same thing. So
Definitely.
that might be a tougher lift, because we'd have to really brainstorm on how we can encourage that, because I think, I don't know, would you think that service providers that are taking these students, I mean, is it the schools that they're interning? Where are they interning?
I mean, for school social workers, yes, they're interning in school.
Okay.
So yes, it would the funding, I leave that up to, the brilliance of you all.
So now how
but
is-
it will be, I'm sorry. go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry, as the college, how are you incentivizing? Because similar to a student teaching program, oftentimes, a teacher may not want to put their students in the hands of some untrained person they may not know. So I know there's incentives where the college may offer professional development, or here's 3 credits if you want to.
Oh, you mean for the supervisors?
Right. So
Yeah,
how are we
yes.
incentivizing that? Are we doing similar?
For the supervisors, they'll get credits for, for
Accepted.
supervising, and and then continuing education credits and everything like that. So we do have the incentive to actually to supervise the interns. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's a larger problem then, because we want to incentivize the institution for taking your students that are, but then you also, how do we pay them? The public schools don't have the funds to pay our student teacher or our interns.
Exactly.
So how do we? Okay.
Yeah. Yes. And it's not a problem getting students placed in schools. Schools, obviously I could just speak at this point from placement on the island. Schools are looking for interns because of the need, but it is trying to cultivate that workforce that is really sorely needed. So.
Okay. Thanks.
You mentioned the 21 hours per week. For how long do they have to do that, for a year?
So if you
How
get your
long?
bachelor's, and then for the master's, that's for the year. If you have the 2 years master's, that's 14 hours for 2 years. And I'm talking about, depending on where the institution's policies. Like I know way back when, like for instance, Columbia was at 21 hours for the 2 weeks. I could speak for my institution, but before the licensing, before you're able to sit for the licensing exam, which can happen either after 2 years post bachelor's, if you're not social work, a year post bachelor's if you are social work, you need to have a certain amount of hours. So again, some schools spread it out so they can go over the summer. But for the most part, it's either 21 hours for a year for what we call advanced standing, or it's 2 years for masters in the traditional master's program.
Very good. That's good information. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Excellent.
thank you.
All right. So we've got just a couple more people that I'd like to see if they're here and if they'd like to speak. Mary Colleen Liberty, who's the Shen PTA Council President.
I'm just here really as an observer, but, I've been working with Dr. Robinson and Rebecca on moving forward with the safety and involving the PTA in that as a support and really a vehicle for communication, and a bridge to parents, really. So that's so important, in this issue, because parents feel so strongly about safety and the ability to be able to tie that together. So we're working in a collaborative way, which is, I think, important for a model for the future for.
Well, thank you very much for being here, and I think this has been a great discussion. The last person I have on my list, and then we can, in the remaining minutes, see if anybody else wants to say anything, is earlier on my way in, I passed our Saratoga County District Attorney, Karen Hagan, was here, and she had to leave for something else, unfortunately. But is there a representative here from the District Attorney's office?
Just her dropping off her
That was just your dropping off testimony. Very good. All right, so that's everybody that I had on the list that wanted to speak. I actually had a quick question for Captain Morley, since I see that you're still here, so about the SRO program. And I apologize for my ignorance, I just don't know the answer to this. Do SROs in our schools carry any firearm, or are they armed? Do they have their firearm with them?
Yes.
Okay. And is it fair to say, and I'll pick on both Dr. McGrath and Dr. Robinson, would they be the only individuals within the school, the SROs, that would have a firearm on them?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And do you believe that that is the right way to go moving forward?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Very good. Do you agree as well? Okay. Very good. Anybody else that we didn't call on that would like to speak? Yes. Come on up.
Thank you. My name is David Vitti. I'm a Clifton Park resident, and I also work for Mutual Link, which is a interoperability company specializing in sharing information from various systems. So, one of our number one customers is K through 12 school districts. We have over 2,000 in the country. So, Assemblywoman Walsh, you hit on technology. The technology right now is amazing. So, for example, from my phone, if, a lot of schools have this, they have a software panic button. If there's an armed assailant, you click and hold it. It automatically creates an incident. It's a collaboration incident so that multiple agencies such as state police, county sheriff, EMS, fire, you name it, whoever has access to that on their smartphone, they get an incident invitation and they collaborate. So now they have the means to communicate together. Right now they don't. So obviously a police department can communicate internally, but not externally. So the technology these days and what's going on throughout the country is not just the physical panic button. That's great. That's Alyssa's law. We need it. But we also, that's just really a phase one. The phase two is how do we extend that to the staff and faculty? Because sometimes the panic button is in one location. It's not accessible. It's not able to be hit. So what happens? Panic. And then, if a catastrophe happens, if there's an armed assailant, they get in, what happens? Now we have kids and faculty calling 911. 911's getting inundated with dozens and hundreds of calls. Mm-hmm. So the first responders, they're not getting the information they need. So in time is of the essence. The first 2, 5, 10, 15 minutes of any kind of situation here is critical. Okay, so what a system like ours does, interoperability, is we tap into all of the radio systems. So if the school has a radio system, we tap into the camera systems. A lot of schools have surveillance systems now on all the means of egress, all the doorways, the hallways, the gyms, the cafeterias. That's now available to the police departments before they even get there. It immediately shares a interactive building file layout. So now think about all the first responders. They may never even been to that school before. Resource officers, absolutely, they know the school like the back of their hand. But I live in Clifton Park. I went to some Shen open houses recently, and the school's changed a lot since I've been there. So if the police officer, whomever, maybe they went to that school. Well, are they really familiar with the changes that took place over the years? So there's a lot of good stuff going on, a lot of proactive stuff, but the technology that really the trend is, the software panic button. That's a huge item to have because the physical one's just not always available, and yet it needs to be. So it's not just, and that touch on the other item that Assemblyman Riley brought up. Fires, you know, what if a student has a seizure? You know, like, this is instantaneous stuff. The ability to click and hit 911 right from your phone is huge. But what also is taking place, so think about the interactive building file layout. That's going out to, in some cases, state police, county sheriff, obviously the school resource officers there on-prem, which is awesome. But we're wasting time getting them the information they need immediately. So that's what the technology is heading towards. And you know, I'm a resident. I'm you know, my daughters go to Shen, and I feel great every time I drop them off, and I see the school resource officer. But let's face it, a lot of these other schools had it too. Okay, if they're targeting and planning something, they're not going to go when the school resource officer is right up front. They're going to try some other means. But there's a lot of other things that, you know, like the state of New Hampshire standardized on a system. So every local police department, state police, and school district have this kind of solution in place.
Now, if
And
I can
quite
interject, because
honestly-
what you're mentioning, in
Yeah.
Suffolk County, we have 1.9 million residents in Suffolk County.
Yes.
We have a system like that. I don't know if it's your system, but it is a panic button system, and that was implemented by the county executive,
Yeah.
which was interesting because at the time we have over 100 school districts, so very tough to kind of deal with that because you want everybody to be on the same page. But when you have a county police department, a county sheriff's office, you kind of need that. So interesting that you bring that up.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables here. Like, you know, for example, Clifton Park is one of the largest towns in the county. We don't have our own police department. We outsource it. Okay, that's great. But Colony, just across the river, is one of the biggest towns in the state, in upstate, and they have their own police department. So what happens if something happens in one of their schools? So, you know, the Colony department is obviously on-prem in there, but they also have an Albany County Sheriff and the state police as well. So, you know, it's all about being able to communicate cross-agency, and they don't have that now unless you invest in this. The other great news is the governor announced $100 million for emergency preparedness such as this summer. The monies are available. We just need to make it happen.
I think one of the obstacles, and I've been talking about this for years, long before I was in this role, the communication key that you mentioned is spot on. The problem becomes the MOUs, the Memorandum of Understanding between agencies. And for some reason, there is always the ego of an agency that stops that connection.
Well, those are normal challenges, but
Yeah.
a lot of times these guys want to work together, you know, and make sure the situations, it's all about situational awareness. If they could see the building file layout on their phone and even turn on a camera, because it's instigated from the school panic button. It's all automated. So once that session is closed out, nobody has anything. Nobody. It's not able to be recorded or played back. It's a live, real-time scenario, and it's encrypted, and it meets the Department of Homeland Security Safety Act.
Well, why don't you send us that information in writing?
Oh, I
So
got
we
it right in
can-
my backpack.
Well, you can give it to us right now.
Thank you.
It's up to you. You didn't bring it up with you. We'll be happy to overlook
No,
it.
I'm really happy to be here. Actually, I just started with this company. They're out of Connecticut. We have an office in Boston, an office in Texas. We're in almost every state to some capacity. We're in hospitals. We're in, you know, arenas. It's all about making sure the first responders have the information they need that is critical at the time of. And that's within the first minute to 5.
No one's questioning that point. If you want to give us something written, we'll be happy to take it.
Yeah, of
Thank
course. I'd love to.
Yeah, we appreciate it.
And I went to a conference last weekend in New York City for the city school superintendents, and I went to the Sagamore one 2 weeks ago for the rest of the state for the superintendents and principals. And there's a lot of interest, but unfortunately, the state has to be involved because, you know, the Department of Education has to be involved too.
One of the reasons we're here, sir, is to get those kind of ideas and deal everybody under
Yeah.
one thing. When we started this, the idea is to get the best practices and the best ideas in front of the state and in front of the entire state. So we're already there, that's why we're here.
Absolutely. Well, I'm happy to be here, happy to share a lot of information with you. I'm relatively new to the company, but I took this job because, look at what's been going on. I get the news alerts, everybody gets it,
Yeah.
it's sad. But we need to take the proper proactive steps. So if something happens, our first responders
We understand.
can perform
We
that.
understand.
That job.
Absolutely.
And
Thank you,
I
David,
appreciate
very much.
everything everybody said, and appreciate being here. But yeah, the technology is available, and that's
Very good.
what's good news.
Good to know.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much. So
Thank you.
I think that we've kind of come to the end. I just wanted to thank everybody for taking the time tonight. I think that we've had some great ideas that have been put forward, a lot of different perspectives, and I open it up to my colleagues for any other closing statements you'd like to make.
So just one point I wanted to make, that, I want to thank everybody for all the information they shared. It's going to help a lot. This is our 5th school safety task force meeting. It's the culmination of those 5 of our tour of the state, trying to get best practices. But I just it was funny, as I was listening, I wanted to compare just one aspect. When you look at the urban and the suburban school districts, you take New York City, for instance, our school district on Staten Island, we're the only borough that's one geographical school district for New York City, which has 32 geographical districts. So my school district in Staten Island has 72 schools, right? The hardening of schools has been something that we've been pushing for over a decade in New York City schools. And when I hear all the great work that's happening outside of New York City and the hardening of schools and making that little catch area, so there's a double door, we don't have that in New York City. So comparing the needs and the actual intention of the school districts is really important to me. One of the reasons why New York City has been apprehensive to do it is because most of our school students are walkers, and they're worried about incidents, and if the front door is locked, those kids can't get back in. And that's something that many people don't realize. And I got to be honest, when I started pushing for locking the front doors of New York City schools, that really wasn't on my mind. And I worked in some pretty challenging areas in the police department. And you would think that I would have thought that. But that's why we have this. That's why we have these meetings, because we all don't have the answers, right? Not one of us together, but collectively, I think we do. And I think that's the message we're hearing tonight, and that's the message we heard over these five task force meetings. So I thank you for all your efforts, and continue the fight. Thank you.
I would just like to thank everyone that did offer their thoughts and their testimony. I think it's really important. I think this has been a great experience for me, attending my first task force, the last one in my area. But I'm looking forward to seeing the final report and see some of these things implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Like I said, this is an idea time has come, as we felt. We need your best practices. We need your best ideas. We need to understand the obstacles that you have to overcome. We know information sharing is a problem. We know mental health is a huge problem. We know we can't get enough people to work in our schools or in our deputies or in teaching or anywhere else. We've had a brain drain in New York, and we're working on it. But these are the kind of ideas, and funding, God only knows. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.